It started at an apartment complex on a Saturday morning. There was gunfire, rapid fire. 3 children were inside the home. Down the hall, in a bedroom, their mother lay unresponsive, shot multiple times. First responders tried to help, but it was already too late. She was pronounced dead at the scene. She was the only one mortally wounded inside that apartment. Her name? Portia Streeter. And that's where this story begins. Some cases take time to feel off or unsettled. This one doesn't. Because from the start, the setting and the timing make certain explanations harder to accept. This didn't happen in the cloak of night, when routines blur and witnesses sleep. It happened on a Saturday morning, inside an apartment, with children awake and families nearby. That matters. Not because it tells us what happened, but because it limits what could have happened without being noticed. And yet, what followed depended on the idea that people wouldn't notice, that they would stay quiet, that time wouldn't interfere, and that those inside the home wouldn't challenge the story being told. What happened inside that apartment was not immediately clear, but it happened in a space where sound carries through shared walls, and where time leaves a record. It leaves impressions. It leaves memories. It leaves witnesses, often unsuspecting ones. And eventually, it leaves questions that words alone can't answer. That's the tension at the heart of this case. Here is what has been reported. On Saturday, January 13th, 2024, at approximately 11:50 a.m., a 911 call was made reporting a shooting at an apartment complex located on the 7300 block of Woodhill Park Drive in Orlando, Florida. Deputies arrived at the apartment and found Sean Range sitting on the floor. He had been shot in the arm. 3 children were inside the apartment: a 10-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 1-year-old. Deputies removed the children from the apartment before continuing their assessment of the scene. As officers worked inside the home, they were directed down the hallway to the master bedroom. There, they found Portia Streeter, unresponsive on the floor. She had been shot multiple times. First responders attempted life-saving measures, but Portia was pronounced dead at the scene. Before Portia was located, Sean told officers that she was all right. He said he had just spoken with her before calling 911. Sean told deputies that an unknown man had followed him into the apartment. According to Sean, the intruder was dressed in black and wearing a mask. He said the man demanded money, forced entry into the bedroom, and struck his 10-year-old son in the head. Portia was in bed there with her kids, but was surprised by the disturbance and attempted to call for help. He said she was shot repeatedly during the encounter. He told officers the intruder fled the apartment with $2,000 cash and their cell phones. Sean said he chased the armed man outside, engaged in a physical struggle, recovered the phones, and then returned to the apartment to tend to Portia. Portia Streeter was 30 years old. She was a mother of 3. All 3 children were shared with Sean Range. At the time of her death, Portia and Sean were not together as a couple. However, Sean would occasionally stay at the apartment, maintaining access to the home because of their shared children. Portia supported her family through creative work, running a small beauty business out of her apartment. She worked as a hairstylist and makeup artist, building something of her own while raising 3 young children. On the morning of January 13th, 2024, Portia was in bed with her kids when things went terribly wrong. What those children experienced that day is difficult to even put into language. And for them, it wouldn't end when the lights and sirens did. It was only the beginning of what they would have to live with. Now, back to what happened next. As the scene was secured, the response expanded. Homicide detectives arrived, along with the medical examiner's office. The apartment shifted from an emergency scene to an active homicide investigation. Although Sean had been shot, his injuries were not life-threatening. Detectives continued interviewing him at the scene before he was carted off to the hospital. He told them he did not know the shooter and had never seen the man before. According to Sean, he had stopped by to check on his family when he was attacked from behind. He said the intruder entered the apartment, opened fire, and then fled with cash and their cell phones. He said Portia reached for her phone to call for help and was shot multiple times in her legs and arms at that time. Sean said he was shot while trying to shield the children from the gunman. After the intruder left, Sean told investigators he waited briefly before chasing after him. He said he caught up to the man outside and fought with him long enough to recover the stolen phones. Sean told detectives he initially planned to go for help, but he said his son begged him not to leave. So he stayed inside, tending to Portia, urging her to keep fighting. After that, he said he went to nearby apartments asking neighbors to call 911. Detectives documented Sean's account. Once his statement was taken, Sean was transported to a hospital for treatment of the gunshot wound to his arm. By then, the apartment had gone quiet. The children were gone. The medics were finished. And what remained were the details investigators would now have to test. The detectives began canvassing the neighborhood. Several neighbors told officers Sean came to their doors asking them to call 911. Some neighbors reported hearing gunshots that morning, around 9:30 a.m. Others said they hadn't seen anyone fleeing. Investigators collected what footage they could, and the timeline began to widen, from the apartment itself to the surrounding minutes and movement. In the days and weeks that followed, detectives also began reaching out to friends and family, not just to understand Portia's personal world, but to understand her connection to Sean. Friends confirmed the two had known each other since high school and shared all 3 children. But investigators also heard something else, that the relationship was complicated. Several described it as unstable, toxic. They said Portia lived alone, but that Sean stayed overnight occasionally. And then investigators began hearing details they had not been told at the scene. Friends reported past issues in the relationship, including domestic violence and infidelity, incidents that, according to them, had never been formally reported. One friend told police Sean had assaulted Portia just days before the shooting. Others said they had seen photos of injuries Portia had shared. The photos were handed over to the police. To detectives, the photos carried weight. They raised new questions and narrowed their focus. As they continued building out the timeline, they pulled surveillance footage from the complex, starting with the cameras closest to Portia's front door. They located a working camera, pulled what they could, and found a problem. The camera that should have captured the intrusion had no record of it. That window of time was missing. But other cameras across the complex had captured movement. And what they captured shifted everything. Footage showed Sean driving near Portia's apartment on the morning of the murder. He wasn't alone. Another man was with him. Detectives continued combing through the footage. Every camera, every angle, every minute they could account for. Because somewhere in that footage, they believed the truth was still waiting. And then they saw it. Video that appeared to show someone running from the area, wearing a distinct, brightly colored Ferrari jacket. When detectives questioned Sean, he described the shooter differently. Black clothing, black mask. But when investigators spoke with Sean's 10-year-old son, the description was strikingly different from Sean's account. The child described clothing that matched what investigators had seen on video. And as investigators kept reviewing footage, they noticed something else. Before the shooting, Sean and the other man were captured on camera, standing behind Portia's apartment. Not running, not fleeing, just there, together. At that point, the scene no longer resembled a spontaneous home invasion. Investigators traced the second man seen with Sean to a nearby residence, less than a mile away. And with surveillance and context now colliding, the the investigation began pointing somewhere very different than where it started. Not toward an unknown intruder, but toward Sean and the man seen with him on surveillance. They identified him as Benjamin Garman. Next, they pulled phone records. Text messages showed Sean and Portia in an intense argument around the time of her death, messages that escalated in tone. Investigators uncovered references to custody and indications that Sean had learned Portia was hiding money from him, including a $20,000 loan she had taken out without his knowledge. Other messages suggested he was upset about her seeing another man. And in the middle of those exchanges, Portia demanded something specific. She wanted Sean to return the key to her apartment. The messages referenced custody repeatedly. Sean claimed Portia was supposed to give him full custody of the children, but the final texts pointed in a different direction. She wasn't going to do that. As those details came together, the picture investigators were forming became harder to ignore. Not because they could prove a crime in that moment, but because the picture developing around Sean didn't fit cleanly with the heroic story that had been given. Months passed, and still, there wasn't enough to arrest him. Not yet. And this is where the case shifts from what happened to what it reveals. There are a lot of things that make this case disturbing, but not because it was chaotic and not because it was impulsive. What makes it disturbing is how confident Sean and Garman were. They didn't stumble into this. It was clear. They made a plan, not a thoughtful one, not a defensible one, but a plan nonetheless. They didn't think they were being reckless. They didn't think they were being careless. And they certainly didn't think they were going to get caught. That confidence showed up almost immediately. Before officers ever reached Portia, Sean told them she was all right. He said he had just spoken to her before calling 911. But when officers reached Portia, she was already dead. And not recently. She had been dead for hours. When the medical examiner arrived at the apartment, the scene told a different version. There was dry blood around Portia's wounds, and early signs that her body had already begun to decompose. Based on those findings, the medical examiner determined Portia had been dead for at least 2 hours before the 911 call was ever made. That places the shooting around 9:30 that morning, the same time neighbors reported hearing gunshots inside the complex. Not 11:50 a.m. when Sean finally made the call. As if no one would notice the difference. And if he had already called, why run to the neighbors and ask them to call too? It was a detail they assumed wouldn't matter. So they carried out their plan in broad daylight, on a Saturday morning, a time when people are home, when cameras are recording, not because something is wrong, but because they're always on. Daylight doesn't hide anything. It illuminates it. And yet the story that followed, the one Sean told, depended on ignoring all of that they wouldn't be seen. But they were. Cameras inside the apartment complex captured movement that morning. They captured Sean, and they captured the man with him. And it didn't stop there. Benjamin Garman, the man seen on surveillance, was later found wearing that same distinctive jacket on his own social media. The same one seen during the murder, in plain sight. And in the hours after the shooting, their brazenness didn't fade. It escalated. That night, Sean and Garman were captured again. This time, at the home of Damien Range. A ring camera recorded Sean boasting about killing people. "We upped the murder rate," he said. Garman was later seen online boasting about being a jackboy. All of it recorded. All of it time-stamped. All of it happening in plain sight. They were smarter than everyone else. That's the lie they told themselves. Not just about when the violence happened, but about how invisible they thought it would be. And daylight kept proving them wrong. Part of Sean's account positioned him as the hero, the protector. He said he was there to check on his family. He said he was injured trying to shield the children. He said he chased an armed man and wrestled stolen phones back, all while he, himself, was unarmed. He wrestled a man who had just shot him. The pieces didn't fit. And underneath that story was a very different reality. At the same time, he claimed to be protecting his family. He was fighting Portia, fighting over money, fighting over control, and ultimately, fighting for custody of the children. That matters, because fighting for custody implies you believe you are the parent best suited to raise them, that you represent what's best for their lives. Pause. But how does the parent who thought he was the one best suited to raise the kids become the very person responsible for what unfolded on the morning of January 13th, 2024, placing those same children inside one of the most traumatic situations imaginable? Investigators say that after the initial intrusion, Sean left the children alone in the apartment with their mother dying or already dead. And when he realized that his story wouldn't hold, that Portia was shot multiple times by a gunman who somehow never managed to land a shot on him, despite Sean placing himself in front of the kids as a target, investigators say he called Garman back to the apartment to shoot him in the arm. Not out of chaos, but to make his account appear more believable. But beyond every violation, every reckless choice, and every layer of trauma inflicted that morning, by the end of it, those children had lost not one parent, but both. One to death, the other to the choices he made. Nothing about that morning served the best interests of those children. Not the planning, not the delay, not the story that came afterward. And that's where the irony becomes impossible to ignore. If this wasn't about protecting them, if it wasn't about their well-being or their best interests, then what was it all for? On April 3rd, 2025, 15 long months after the murder, Sean Landis Range Jr., 32, was taken into custody in connection with Portia's death. By that point, the man investigators believe helped carry out the killing was already behind bars. Benjamin Garman, 26, was in custody out of county on federal weapons charges. Both men were charged with first-degree murder. According to arrest reports, investigators believe Garman acted at Sean's direction. To this day, both men deny responsibility. Sean denies knowing Garman. Garman denies shooting Portia or acting as a home invader. And while the courts will determine what happened inside that apartment, the evidence has already raised questions about timelines, responsibility, and the stories people tell when they believe confidence will be enough.